within the priesthood, there's been the absolute annihilation and destruction of progressive Catholic theology. Researchers at the Catholic Project at CUA, the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., in 2022 polled thousands of Catholic priests. In the last 2 years, they've released 2 different reports summarizing some of their findings. I want to focus on this second of those reports, which looks at how priests relate to one another and how similar or different they are from one another theologically and politically. And the results are kind of shocking. The study authors themselves summarize this by saying that in terms of political and theological self-identification, we see, quote, the collapse of liberal or progressive self-identification. Most older priests, when asked, will identify themselves as either somewhat liberal or very liberal politically. For instance, about 15% of priests ordained in the early 1960s characterize themselves today as very liberal. In comparison, no one the pollsters found who was ordained during that time period described themselves as very conservative. Now, I'm just eyeballing the charts here. They didn't release the exact numbers, but there looks to be about a 3-to-1 ratio among all liberals to all conservative priests from the 1960s. Now, contrast that with the group of priests ordained from 2010 forwards. In this group, conservatives make up an actual majority of the priests ordained. Now, if you're looking at the numbers, you might notice the light blue is actually moderates, which makes it look like there's more liberals than there are. But politically, we find that liberals go from being a majority of priests in the 1960s generation to making up only single digits today. As the study authors point out, while roughly half, 52%, of the recently ordained cohort described themselves as conservative or very conservative, a full 44%, the highest percentage of any cohort, self-described as moderate. Now notice that math. It means that liberal Catholic priests went from being a majority in the 1960s to roughly 4%. You got 52% conservative, 44% moderate. It gets you to 96%. So only about 4% of the more newly ordained men from the last 15 years are going to politically identify as liberal, even somewhat liberal. That's just political orientation. And it is important to stress that we don't know exactly what anyone means when they're responding to a questionnaire about whether they're conservative or liberal. Are they thinking of their views on abortion, on immigration, on something else? It's a little bit vibey, but the vibe suggests a very clear shift in terms of how priests think about themselves, about politics, and about the world.